The sun was slowly setting over a quiet African village, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Small clay huts stood in rows, surrounded by dry paths and open land. Children's laughter echoed in the distance, while women carried water in clay pots on their heads. It was a simple life, hard but peaceful. On that very evening, a young bride stepped into this village for the first time. Her name was Amina. She wore a bright traditional dress, her head slightly lowered, her heart filled with hope. This was her new home, her new beginning. She had dreamed of this moment all her life. A loving husband, a warm home, and a family that would accept her as their own. As she walked toward her husband's house, she glanced around with curious eyes, trying to imagine her future here. But something felt different. The house she entered was larger than the others, but it didn't feel welcoming. The air inside was heavy, almost cold. Her mother-in-law stood at the doorway, watching her silently. There was no smile, no warmth, just a sharp, judging stare. Amina forced a gentle smile, hoping to make a good impression. She greeted her respectfully, lowering her head. But the older woman didn't respond kindly. Instead, she turned away without a word. In that moment, Amina felt a strange uneasiness in her heart. She didn't know it yet, but this house was not the home she had dreamed of. It was the beginning of a life that would test her strength, her patience, and her soul. From the very first morning, Amina realized something was wrong. She woke up before sunrise, eager to prove herself as a good daughter-in-law. The sky was still dark as she quietly stepped outside, ready to begin her new responsibilities. She cleaned the yard, fetched water from the well, and prepared the kitchen, hoping her efforts would bring a smile to her mother-in-law's face. But that smile never came. Instead, the older woman watched her with cold, critical eyes. Nothing Amina did was ever good enough. If she swept the floor, it wasn't clean enough. If she cooked, it wasn't tasty enough. Every small mistake became a reason for harsh words. "Is this how your mother raised you?" she would say with a sharp tone. "Useless girl. You don't even know how to run a home." Each word felt like a wound. Amina stayed quiet. She lowered her head and accepted everything, believing that patience would eventually soften her mother-in-law's heart. She reminded herself that respect and silence were her duty. But days turned into weeks, and nothing changed. The kindness she gave was met with cruelty. Her silence was taken as weakness. Soon, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a place where she was constantly judged, constantly controlled. Her mother-in-law didn't treat her like family. She treated her like a servant who could never be enough. Even the smallest things were controlled: when she could rest, what she could say, how she should behave. Amina began to feel invisible. She had entered that house with hope in her heart. But now, that hope was slowly starting to fade. At first, Amina thought the harsh words were the worst part of her new life. But she was wrong. One evening, after a long day of endless work, she quietly sat in the corner of the kitchen, waiting for food. The smell of freshly cooked stew filled the air, making her realize just how hungry she was. She hadn't eaten properly all day. Her mother-in-law served food to everyone else in the house: her husband, other family members, placing full plates in front of them. Amina watched silently, her stomach aching. When she finally gathered the courage to step forward, her voice was soft. "Can I have some food too?" The room went quiet. Her mother-in-law slowly turned toward her, her eyes cold and unforgiving. "Food?" she said sharply. "What have you done to deserve food?" Amina froze. She had worked all day, cleaning, cooking, carrying water, but somehow it still wasn't enough. Without another word, the older woman took the remaining food and walked away, leaving nothing behind. That night, Amina went to sleep hungry. But it didn't stop there. The next day, and the day after, the same thing happened. Food became a reward she could never earn. Her body grew weaker with each passing day. Her hands trembled as she worked. Her steps became slower. But still, no one showed her mercy. Hunger wasn't just pain, it was control. Amina realized that this wasn't punishment for something she did. It was a way to break her. And slowly, it was working. Amina used to believe that no matter how difficult things became, her husband would be her support. After all, he was the one who brought her into this home, the one who promised to protect her. But slowly, that belief began to break. One evening, after another long day without food, Amina gathered the courage to speak. Her body was weak, her voice barely steady, but her heart was desperate. She found her husband sitting quietly outside the house, watching the fading sunset. For a moment, she hesitated, then she stepped closer. "I'm trying my best," she said softly. "But your mother, she doesn't let me eat. I feel so weak." Her words trembled in the air. Her husband didn't look at her. He remained silent. Amina waited, hoping he would say something, anything. A word of comfort, a sign of care, a promise to help. But instead, he let out a quiet sigh and said, "You should try harder to please her. She's my mother." That was all. No anger, no concern, no defense, just silence and blame. In that moment, something inside Amina broke. She realized she was completely alone in this house. The one person who could have stood up for her chose not to. Days passed, and it became clear her husband saw everything. He noticed her weakness, her hunger, her pain. But he never spoke, never intervened, never cared enough to change anything. His silence became louder than any harsh words. Because sometimes, the deepest pain doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the people who were supposed to protect you. Days turned into weeks, and Amina's body grew weaker with each passing sunrise. Her steps became slow and unsteady. Her hands trembled as she worked, and her eyes carried a quiet exhaustion that no one seemed to notice or care about. The constant hunger was slowly draining her strength. But even in her weakest moments, something inside her refused to break. Every morning, before anyone else woke up, Amina would quietly rise and begin her work. She would sweep the yard, fetch water from the distant well, wash clothes, and prepare meals, hoping, just hoping, that her efforts might bring even a small change in the way she was treated. Her body begged her to rest, but her heart kept pushing her forward. Because giving up was not an option she allowed herself. Sometimes, while carrying heavy buckets of water under the hot sun, her vision would blur. Her legs would shake, and she would have to stop and hold on to something just to stay standing. But she never complained. She never asked for pity. She believed that patience would eventually bring peace, that her kindness would be seen, that her suffering would one day end. Inside, she carried a quiet strength, something no one could see. It was the strength of a woman who had been pushed to her limits, but still chose to endure. A woman who was broken on the outside, but still standing on the inside. Even though she was treated like nothing, she was not nothing. And deep down, Amina knew her story wasn't over yet. One afternoon, as the golden sun stretched across the African village, a strange silence settled in the air. Amina was outside, carrying a heavy bucket of water, her body weak and her steps slow. The road beneath her feet felt longer than usual, as if every step demanded more strength than she had left. Suddenly, she heard footsteps, heavy, calm, and unfamiliar. She looked up and saw a man walking into the village. He was different from the others, well-dressed, confident, and carrying an air of quiet authority. The villagers watched him curiously, whispering among themselves, unsure of who he was or where he came from. But Amina didn't pay much attention at first. She was too tired, too hungry, too weak. As she tried to continue walking, her strength gave out for a moment. The bucket slipped slightly in her hands, and she nearly lost her balance. That's when the stranger stopped. He had been watching her, not just looking, but truly observing. He noticed her trembling hands, her exhausted eyes, and the way she struggled just to stay standing. Something about her situation felt deeply wrong. He slowly walked toward her, his voice calm and gentle. "You shouldn't be carrying such a heavy burden alone." Amina looked up, surprised. No one had spoken to her like that in a long time. There was no anger in his voice, no judgment, just concern. For a brief moment, she felt something she had almost forgotten: kindness. And in that moment, the stranger unknowingly stepped into her life. The one person who might change everything. That night, something unusual happened. The village had grown quiet, with only the soft sounds of night insects filling the air. Amina lay awake in her small corner of the house, her stomach aching from hunger. Sleep had become a struggle. Her body was too weak, her mind too restless. Suddenly, she heard a soft sound outside. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Her heart began to race. Who could it be at this hour? Quietly, she sat up and peeked through the small opening near the door. To her shock, she saw the same stranger standing outside. But this time, he wasn't just passing by. In his hands, He held a small bundle of food. He looked around carefully, making sure no one was watching. Then, gently, he placed the food near the door and knocked softly. Amina froze. For a moment, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. No one had ever done something like this for her before. Not in this house, not in this life. With trembling hands, she slowly opened the door. The stranger looked at her with calm, kind eyes. "You don't have to suffer in silence," he said softly. Amina's eyes filled with tears. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. He gently nodded toward the food. "Eat," he said. "You need strength." And for the first time in many days, Amina held food in her hands that was meant for her, not as a servant, not as a burden, but as a human being. She took a small bite, and tears began to fall, not from pain this time, but from kindness she had almost forgotten existed. As Amina sat in the dim light, quietly eating the food the stranger had given her, her heart slowly began to feel warmth again. Each bite felt like life returning to her tired body. The stranger stood nearby, watching her silently. There was something different about him, something she couldn't fully understand. His presence felt calm, but powerful, like he carried a hidden truth. After a moment, he spoke. "Amina." She looked up, surprised. He knew her name. "How do you know me?" she asked softly, her voice still weak. The man hesitated for a moment, then sighed gently. "I have been watching this village for some time," he said, "and I have seen what has been happening to you." Amina froze. Her heart began to race. Was she being watched? By whom? And why? The stranger took a step closer, his expression serious but kind. "I am not just a passerby," he continued. "I am connected to this land and to the people who live here." Amina's eyes widened. She didn't understand what he meant. But then he said something that made her breath stop. "You were never meant to suffer like this." His voice was calm, but powerful. "You are stronger than you think, Amina. And your story is not over yet." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The man in front of her wasn't just a stranger. He was someone sent at the right time, to witness her pain, and to change her destiny. Amina felt a strange mix of fear and hope, because she didn't know what was coming next. But she knew one thing for sure. Everything was about to change. The next morning, the village felt different. Whispers spread quickly. Something unusual was about to happen. The stranger who had arrived the day before was now seen speaking with elders and respected members of the community. His presence carried weight, as if people naturally listened to him. Meanwhile, inside the house, Amina stood quietly, still feeling weak, but something inside her had changed. For the first time in a long time, she felt a small spark of hope. But that peace didn't last long. Her mother-in-law entered the room with her usual cold expression. But this time, something was different. The stranger was standing nearby, watching, observing, and waiting. The stranger calmly asked a simple question. "Why is this young woman being treated this way?" The room fell silent. The mother-in-law tried to speak confidently, but her voice lacked its usual power. She attempted to justify her actions, claiming Amina was lazy, ungrateful, and undeserving. But the stranger wasn't convinced. He turned toward Amina gently and said, "Tell the truth." With a trembling voice, Amina finally spoke. She shared everything: the hunger, the cruelty, the silent suffering, and the nights she cried alone. Each word revealed a painful truth the household had tried to hide. The villagers who gathered outside listened carefully. Their expressions slowly changed, from confusion to shock to anger. The silence was broken. People began to speak. How could this happen? No one deserves this kind of treatment. The truth could no longer be ignored. For the first time, Amina was not alone, and the one who once suffered in silence was finally being heard. The sun rose slowly over the African village, painting the sky with soft golden light. But this morning felt different, lighter, peaceful. Amina stood outside the house, no longer the same broken woman she once was. Her body was still recovering, her strength slowly returning, but her spirit had already changed. The days of silent suffering were over. After the truth was revealed, everything shifted. The villagers, once unaware, now understood her pain. The mother-in-law's harsh control had been exposed, and she could no longer hide behind her cruelty. The stranger stood nearby, watching quietly as Amina took a deep breath. For the first time, she didn't feel fear. She felt freedom. Her husband finally saw the reality of what had been happening. The silence that once protected injustice could no longer stand. Though the damage had been done, something inside him had changed too. Amina, however, didn't wait for apologies. She chose herself. She chose healing over suffering, strength over silence. Slowly, she began to rebuild her life, step by step. She found work, regained her health, and surrounded herself with people who respected her. The village that once witnessed her pain now watched her rise. No longer weak, no longer invisible, Amina had transformed into a woman of strength. And as the wind gently moved across the land, it carried a powerful truth. Sometimes, the darkest pain leads to the strongest rise. And sometimes, a single act of kindness can change a life forever.